This video is brought to you by Manscaped, who have taken a step up from Balloween to bring your face the cleanest shave it's ever seen. So this season, no need to toil and trouble. Manscaped's all-new Handyman is the best way to get rid of that stubble. Get the sweetest treat this Halloween by going to manscaped.com and using offer code SKILLUP for 20% off and free shipping. Gamers, is it just me or are these shows getting longer by the week? I thought this would be a relatively short one, but then John Riccatello got sacked or retired. Sony announced a new PS5 and it turns out that Gollum apology was written by ChatGPT. So yeah, shit is pretty wild and it's only getting wilder by the week, so let's not waste any time. Here comes the news. Breaking news, just as I was putting the finishing touches on this episode, Sony has revealed a new PS5 model. Now, just to make sure we don't get too carried away, this is just a minor refresh that we all kind of knew was coming, but still, it's interesting. This is the newly redesigned PS5. It has trimmed down its Yu-Gi-Oh! Inspired collar at the top. Damn shame about that. It's also been on a diet. It's 30% smaller in total volume, and it weighs either 18% or 24% less than the previous models. It comes in two SKUs, an all-digital option and one with a disc drive, but important to note that the all-digital version can be upgraded to include the disc drive, which is now sold separately. You can see here that this side panel opens up, allowing you to add that disc drive in seamlessly. We sort of knew this refresh and this optional disc drive was coming since it was leaked a little while ago, but it is interesting in the context of the recent Xbox leak, which revealed that Microsoft are also working on a mid-gen refresh, with the Series X console going all digital. Those documents did not make reference to an optional disc drive add-on, so it's unclear whether Microsoft are going to remain committed to physical media in the future, where clearly Sony are doing just that as evidenced by this latest announcement. The new PS5 model will be the same price as the current one for the disc drive, though the digital version will be slightly more expensive. Both SKUs will have slightly more storage at 1TB. It's arriving in November in the US and will roll out in other territories later, and it will become the default PS5 as soon as the previous inventory is exhausted. And that's it. That's the new PS5. Moving right along now, let's take a good look at that recent Cyberpunk news, since it gives us an interesting look at the past, present, and future of both the Cyberpunk franchise and CD Projekt Red as a whole. So the first thing you should know is that Cyberpunk has sold an absolute buttload. This week, CD Projekt Red held an earnings call style event where they revealed a huge amount of financial and sales information. One of their biggest headlines was the fact that Cyberpunk 2077 has now sold a total of 25 million copies across all platforms. Pretty staggering result given that the game was all manner of busted on every platform at launch, and it stayed that way for quite some time. On the one hand, 25 million ain't bad, but on the other hand, you really got to imagine that CD Projekt Red are curious how many more copies they might have sold had the launch not been such a disaster. Quite interesting to note the attach rates for Cyberpunk, since CD Projekt Red were also kind enough to disclose the number of Phantom Liberty expansion packs sold. That number comes in at a very respectable 3 million, but that is just over 10% of the existing player base. Sure, you need to remove last-gen consoles from the mix since they were left behind with this new update, but personally, I would have expected that number to be higher, especially considering how well received the expansion has been, both critically and with fans. One final big fat number that CD Projekt Red were willing to flop on the table, 100 million. That is the total number of games sold across both of their franchises, The Witcher and Cyberpunk. And since we know that Cyberpunk has sold 25 million, it doesn't take a math genius to figure out that The Witcher has been very good to CD Projekt Red. Or they've been very good to it, I guess I should say. Coming back to Cyberpunk, if you're wondering what the split is across platforms, well, CD Projekt Red kindly spelled that out too, at least for Phantom Liberty. Of the 3 million copies sold, 13% of them were on Xbox, 20% of them were on PlayStation, and a whopping 68% of them were on PC, with 10% of those being sold through Good Old Games, CD Projekt Red's DRM-free shopfront. Not gonna lie, pretty stunned at this 68% number. First of all, just 1% shy of being nice. Such a shame. And secondly, this number is the opposite of what you usually see for most games, where console sales make up the lion's share of units shipped. On one level, it does make sense, given how much trouble consoles had playing this game. Many people chose to play it on PC instead if they could. I guess on another level, Cyberpunk has always been a real showcase for next-gen PC tech, and much like Crysis before it, Cyberpunk has always been a good way to put your PC through its paces. This figure reminds me of something the Capcom CEO said a little while ago. Capcom actually views the PC as their primary platform now. The grand migration to the superior platform continues, and Cyberpunk seems to be an important milestone in that journey. One of the most fascinating figures that CD Projekt Red were willing to divulge this week is just how much it costs to fix Cyberpunk post-launch, and it is a pretty eye-watering number. If you add up development and marketing for Phantom Liberty, you get about $80 million US. You can then add other post-launch development costs of around $40 million US. That brings the total bill for all Cyberpunk 2077 post-launch development to $125 million US. Contrast that with the cost to make The Last of Us Part 2, which we know cost around $200 million thanks to that hilarious redaction leak a little while ago. CD Projekt Red spent more than half of that on just post-game development and marketing, and that's in addition to the $316 million spent on the game's initial development and marketing. Cyberpunk 2077 costs nearly $500 million to get to this point. The price of AAA games is absolutely absurd, and it's only getting more crazy by the day. So that's the past and present of Cyberpunk, but what about its future? Well, this week, CD Projekt Red announced that they've partnered up with Anonymous Content to do a live-action production based on Cyberpunk. No, these aren't the hackers who wear those creepy Guy Fawkes masks. Instead, they are a very, very legit production house responsible for TV shows like True Detective and Mr. Robot, and movies like The Revenant and Spotlight. These are serious people who make serious stuff, and they are making something set in the Cyberpunk universe. I think I speak for most of us when I say, you have my attention. But that's not all, folks. Studio Trigger, who delivered the absolutely superb Edge Runners anime, may be suiting up for round 2. CD Projekt Red were waxing lyrical about upcoming projects when they mentioned Trigger. After a bit of roundabout, Chief Creative Officer Adam Badowski then added, quote, "What's important is that Trigger, our partner, has certain rules for announcing projects and we have to be compliant with this," end quote. I mean, not exactly subtle, Adam. Probably could have worded that a bit better. Do keep your excitement in check about a potential Edge Runners Season 2, mind you. Previously, Trigger has said that they only intended Edge Runners to be a one-shot series, and so if they are doing more stuff with CD Projekt Red, it'll more than likely be a different story. Not altogether surprising if you've seen Edge Runners. So that's the transmedia. What about the actual video games? Well, CD Projekt Red are already talking about Cyberpunk 2. I mean, it's announced in the form of Project Orion, and recently the game's director, Gabe Emantangelo, said on the Friends Per Second podcast that he was unworried about the move to a new country, a new studio, and the move to a new game engine, Unreal Engine 5, calling these things exciting rather than scary. Just this past week, the game's quest director, Paul Sasko, was asked if CD Projekt Red regrets not including a third-person option in the game and wondered if they might consider including one in the sequel. Sasko did not mince words, quote, "There are no regrets on our part. I wanted to say that the first-person perspective is the main characteristic for Cyberpunk and its perception by the players too. It's also noticeably different from The Witcher, and this helped us craft the product identity as such," end quote. He did go on to say that when it comes to Cyberpunk 2, the team hasn't decided yet which way they might go, so we might see a third-person option yet. But I think it's almost impossible that CD Projekt Red will abandon the first-person perspective altogether, since it really is a pretty central part of the experience. So CD Projekt Red are riding pretty high right now, copies selling, big dollars flying, TV shows and or movies, a sequel in the offing, but all this success hasn't stopped them from having 3 rounds of layoffs over the last 3 months, and as a result, some staff at CD Projekt Red are establishing a union and they are inviting people to join. It's not clear how many people have joined or will join the union, but they've submitted all legally required documentation, which means that CD Projekt Red's management will have to recognize them at some point. This story is still developing, so we'll check back in on it as more information about that union becomes known. That wasn't the only games union to form this week, believe it or not. Over in Sweden, 100 developers from Avalanche Studios joined the Swedish trade union Unionen and are now collective bargaining with Avalanche management over their contract. These 100 people represent a full fifth of Avalanche's total workforce, which is a very sizable block, especially in the world of game dev where union representation is extremely low. Why might so many game developers be unionizing right now? I don't know. Maybe it's because according to VentureBeat, there have been over 6,100 jobs lost in the gaming industry just thus far. We've still got 3 months of this year left, don't forget. That number is huge when you consider the size of your average AAA studio, which is usually around 400 to 800 people strong. Depending on how you slice it, that number is the equivalent of like 15 major AAA studios vanishing in the past 9 months. That is how much gaming talent has been either displaced or lost as the cutback craze continues to plow a course straight through game dev. The past few weeks I've been recounting job losses to you here, and this week is no different. Telltale, who had earlier been wound up and reformed and have just recently shipped the Expanse game, have just laid off a huge chunk of their staff. It's not clear how many, but according to some of the Telltale staff willing to speak on the matter, it's a hell of a lot and definitely threatens the future of the studio and its projects, despite Telltale saying that its business will continue as usual. The cuts keep coming. This time it's connected to the upcoming Dragon Age Dreadwolf. You might recall that BioWare just completed a round of layoffs, some of which resulted in the loss of senior talent. This most recent round isn't actually BioWare themselves, but rather an outsourced QA provider. Keyword Studios was providing quality assurance to Dragon Age Dreadwolf, but when BioWare didn't renew that contract with the studio then laid off 13 workers, all of whom were unionized in what was the first video game union in Canada, who incidentally were in the middle of a collective bargaining negotiation with the studio. Coincidence? I don't know, it's possible, but it sure doesn't look good from the outside looking in. Coming back to those previous BioWare layoffs, while a number of those affected might be laid off, they certainly aren't taking it lying down. 7 of the 50 laid off staff have refused to accept the severance offers made to them by EA BioWare, choosing instead to sue. They claimed that the packages offered to them were not in keeping with industry norms or even employment law, and as such have brought suit demanding not only better packages but also damages, as the staff are out of the job and unable to share the years of work they've put into Dreadwolf in their portfolios, since all that work is under NDA until the game releases. This suit has only just been brought, so a hearing is still some ways off. Hopefully each and every one of these people get a nice fat paycheck at the end of it. EA can dip into the $5.7 billion in profit they made last year. That ought to cover it. I'm sorry to keep the bad times rolling this episode, but unfortunately this is just the state of the industry, so I have to recount it to you. Up next, a promising studio closes their doors due to a lack of funding. Dang. That's not me saying dang, by the way. That is the name of the studio, Dang. This team put out the truly excellent Boomerang X back in 2021. It was kind of like a single-player arena shooter, like if Unreal Tournament had a single-player mode. It was genuinely great. It's at 95% positive on Steam, and Devolver Digital published it because they know a winner when they see it. Sadly, Dang announced this week that they are closing their doors as they were unable to secure funding for the next project. A reminder that the current belt tightening going on across the industry isn't just staff cuts, it's also fewer titles being greenlit. Really hope this team finds a good home somewhere because any studio would be lucky to have them. There is at least a little bit of justice in the air right now though, because last week 5 senior executives of Ubisoft were arrested and briefly detained by the French authorities for questioning in relation to the rampant sexual harassment and bullying that they oversaw during their tenure. Arrests included Serge Hascoët, the former chief creative officer, and Tommy Francois, ex-VP of editorial and creative services, both of whom were let go by Ubisoft after the news of widespread cultural issues began to circulate. The French authorities are still pursuing this matter and various civil suits are still in train, so we'll surely hear more about this over the coming months and likely years. Speaking of executives getting the chop, there's been a big update on all that Unity drama that unfolded a few weeks back. You'll no doubt recall that Unity absolutely kamikazed their brand by trying to apply an egregious new tax on game installations, one that would apply retroactively for any game ever made in Unity. This caused a level of backlash so massive and so universal that I don't think I've ever seen the gaming community so united. Except maybe against those loot boxes back in Star Wars Battlefront 2. Hell, even the politicians were getting in on that mess. The man at the center of this latest Unity mess was one John Riccitiello, a former CEO of EA and now former CEO of Unity. Unity announced just yesterday that Riccitiello would be retiring effective immediately. That is not how retirements are meant to happen, by the way, as evidenced by Jim Ryan's recent retirement announcement. He'll stay in the job until March of next year, while old Riccitiello is out on his ass right now. Hard to imagine that a single soul will miss him. His legacy at EA is one that saw them earn the worst company in America 2 years running, and his legacy at Unity is one of the biggest brand implosions in the history of brands. Given this track record, I fully expect Google to announce him as the new head of a cloud streaming service coming to you real soon. Poor Phil Harrison catching strays. Guy just can't catch a break, can he? Anyways, so long Riccitiello. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. And please don't come back. Big news for Redfall fans, all 3 of you. The game just got its biggest update yet. Recently, Redfall had been in the news when PC Games N ran an article titled, "Redfall doesn't have enough Steam players to fill a team." A team is 4 people, by the way, so yeah, ouch. Of course, most people are playing this game on Game Pass, but let's be real. No one is playing this game. Steam, Xbox, Game Pass PC, whatever. Steam has always been an accurate barometer of overall game health and success, and for less than 4 people playing, I mean, to say Redfall is at death's doorstep would be unfair to the doorstep. But stop the presses, a wild patch appears, and it actually has a fair amount of stuff in it, all of which should have been in at launch, mind you, but hey, let's not worry about that now. There's a performance mode available on Xbox consoles, which allows 60 FPS at dynamic resolutions. There's improved PC performance, apparently, things like aim assist and dead zone, which were horrendously bad at launch. There are now stealth takedown animations. What an age we live in when an arcane game now finally supports proper stealth animations. There's also an increase in mob density throughout the town, as well as improvements to AI. So that's all cool stuff, absolutely. Stuff that is sure to move the needle and get this game's player base back to where it should be. And sure enough, a week after the patch has launched, the game has skyrocketed in popularity from an average concurrent player count of 3 to an average concurrent player count of 50. 50 players. Where once you couldn't form one team, now you can form approximately 12 of them. So long as they're all your friends, because this game still doesn't have any form of matchmaking. It's a reminder of what I said in my initial review. The problems with Redfall are so deeply baked that there is no turning this around short of a complete top to bottom rebooting of this. putting 2 years of development work into it and relaunching it as a new game. Unlike Fallout 76, Redfall has no existing fan base to fall back on, and I just can't see Microsoft green-lighting that sort of investment because frankly, no one is asking for it. Bethesda and Arcane are still obligated to deliver some new content to the game in the form of new playable characters, but once that's done, I fully expect them just to wrap up and move on to the next thing. Hopefully Prey 2, or just helping out in the development of Dishonored 3, which we know Arcane Leon are currently working on, if that recent leak was accurate. Hasn't been a particularly great week for Bethesda, really. This past week, Steam user reviews for Starfield fell to a mixed 69% on Steam. Nice. This means that Starfield is now the lowest rated Bethesda software game on Steam, even lower than Fallout 76, which currently sits at a mostly positive 75%. I'm not gonna lie, as someone who has not yet played Starfield, it has been utterly fascinating to watch the discourse around it unfold, opening with near universal 9s and 10s from critics, followed by a strong initial impression from fans, but as time wore on, the narrative began to shift, and it's hard to find a kind word for Starfield out there these days, many decrying its outdated design, over-reliance on menus and loading screens, its repetitive activities, and its empty procedurally generated worlds. Speaking of which, did you guys see the latest Girlfriend reviews vid reviewing Starfield? Absolute classic, particularly this musical number. Take a listen.
Trailers hiding all the rag dolls. Goddamn, lockpicking is way too slow. Too much cargo to stow.
And that is why Girlfriend reviews are the best. I will leave a link to that full video below. As rough a time as Redfall and Starfield might be having, no game this year has had a worse time than Gollum. This is the lowest rated major release of the year and tanked so badly that it made the developer Daedalic Entertainment immediately shutter their development studio, meaning that the company will now focus all of its efforts on publishing and distribution. Given how bad the game is, it was only a matter of time until someone managed to get in behind the scenes and figure out what went wrong. That publication ended up being Game 2, a German outlet who spoke to 32 current and former employees of Daedalic Entertainment. They said that the studio was not at all equipped to deliver a third-person AAA game, as they really only had experience in 2D point-and-click style adventure games, and management weren't able to secure new talent with the required expertise. They also say that management oversaw a culture of crunch and hostility, and that the title was developed on a budget of 15 million euros when many times more than that would have been required to properly deliver it. The most ridiculous revelation was in relation to the apology posted by publisher Nacon to Twitter. 2 staff members say that this apology was written by ChatGPT, and you know what? I believe it. This is the one that managed to misspell Lord of the Rings, calling it Lord of the Ring. Like, how do you get that wrong? Anyway, the ChatGPT thing aside, nothing about this is remotely surprising, since a product this bad could only be the result of serious dysfunction at both the studio and publisher level. It wasn't the first time we've seen it, and it certainly won't be the last. A quick lightning round to finish off. David Soliani, game director of both of the excellent Mario Rabbids games, wants to make a new Rayman game. Ubisoft, let this man make whatever the fuck he wants. We need a new Rayman game, and this guy would crush it. Give him money and a team and watch him bring back that limbless hero because we need him. And there's only so many DLC crossovers he can appear in before we start to lose our patience. Nintendo have said they plan to continue supporting the Switch in 2024. Yeah, no shit. The new console isn't likely to ship until the end of 2024, so it's not like they're just going to put their feet up until then. You can bet with an install base of over 130 million units, they're going to support the Switch well beyond just 2024. Dredge has just sold 1 million units, and if you haven't bought it yet, you should go out and buy it right now and make that 1,000,001. That is all I have to say about that. Congrats to the team. That Horizon Forbidden West Complete Edition, which just dropped on PS5, it's on 2 discs, making it the very first 2-disc PS5 release. Given that we're only halfway through this current console generation, you should absolutely expect many more of these to come. Liza P is getting some DLC. That was confirmed by the developer Neowitz themselves, who in a job posting advertised their intention to make DLC for the game. Absolute smash hit for this team, both critically and commercially. Great to see them doubling down on it. And finally, Payday 2 has more players on Steam than Payday 3. There's a simple explanation for this. You can actually play Payday 2, whereas Payday 3 is still an absolutely balked mess weeks after launch. I think this is actually the worst live service release of 2023, just in terms of technical issues. I mean, Wayfinder had it pretty bad, but they got their shit together in like a week. We're 3 weeks deep on Payday now, and there is absolutely no end in sight. I guess the real heist was the money they took from you when they sold you this broken-ass game. I know it's an obvious joke, but someone had to make it. Like and subscribe. So what got announced or delayed this week? Well, Steam Next Fest is running at the moment. We'll talk more about that later. And as a result, we've got quite a few reveals and announcements for smaller titles and indies. For the King 2 is a good example. It's a co-op, turn-based, roguelike tabletop game that did well for itself in its first outing and the sequel just got a release date November 3rd. Karmazoo is another one. Now listen, you should probably have a look at this. And not only because it's published by Devolver Digital, I played this one a while back and it's a co-op puzzle platformer where you can play with up to 9 other people and they're randomly match made and you solve problems collaboratively, and the more experienced people get rewarded for helping less experienced people, hence Karmazoo. It was actually a really good time and I low-key expect this one to pop off. I really do. It's exclusive to PC for now and it's dropping on November 15th. The Last Faith is a very promising looking 2D action Metroidvania Souls-like. I profiled it a while back and I put this on your radar segment. I really dug the animations and art style. This one also got a release date this week and it too will drop on November 15th. Completing the November 15th trilogy is American Arcadia. It's kind of like The Truman Show, but a video game, a puzzle adventure game about a dude trying to escape a reality TV show. Presentation looks fantastic, and I'm a sucker for the premise since The Truman Show is literally one of my favorite movies. Like I said, November 15th, exclusive to PC for the moment. The CRPG renaissance continues with Thaumaturge, an isometric RPG with turn-based combat set in early 20th century Warsaw. Don't see too many games set there. This one has long looked promising, and it now has a release date 6th of December, exclusive to PC. Commandos is back. The classic real-time strategy stealth series is getting a new release in 2024, this time from a new developer called Claymore Game Studios. They're calling it Commandos Origins, and they released a cheeky teaser trailer this past week. No other details yet, so I'll keep you posted. Alright, Silent Hill Ascension. So, this one, I don't know, man. This isn't a game per se, it's more of an interactive horror show that you tune into on a live stream, and then you vote what happens next to the characters in the story. So it's kind of like Twitch-based Pokemon, only instead of Pikachu, it's Pyramid Head. Personally, I think this could be interesting if you had someone who really understood Silent Hill and was brave enough to write something fucked up enough. In the modern era though, I don't know, and Konami have not exactly been the best stewards of this franchise. Regardless, we're going to find out for ourselves how all of this shakes out when Silent Hill Ascension debuts October 31st at 6 PM PT. The developers have said that there's going to be a new scene released every day for 6 months. I really can't see how you're going to deliver an authentic Silent Hill style horror experience in that format, but man, I don't know, hopefully I'm wrong. Here's something unexpected. Diablo 4 is coming to Steam. It follows Overwatch 2, which did the same thing a while back. Personally, I'm looking forward to the user reviews. When it comes to this shit, I'm like Palpatine. I love democracy. 2 delay announcements this week. The first was for Banisher's Ghosts of New Eden, an upcoming cinematic third-person Sony-style game from Focus Home Interactive. This was meant to release before the year was out, but has just been pushed back to February 13th next year. The developer citing an overcrowded year-end as the reason, which is true sort of, also kind of not, since the only other major release dropping in November or December is the Avatar game. Compare that to February next year, which now has Suicide Squad, Helldivers 2, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. My suspicion was that this was less about release timing and more about needing a bit of extra time to polish the game. Speaking of which, Ubisoft have delayed the release of X-Defiant. There was no specific date set for it, but whatever date it might have been has just been pushed back to time unknown. Likely next year if I was to hazard a guess, giving Call of Duty its moment in the sun. X-Defiant is actually pretty good, but the team have said their recent public test revealed some issues that they wanted to iron out before launch. So full respect to them for wanting to take the time and get it right. So what came out last week? Well, the fabulous Fear Machine arrived on PC. It's that very pulpy looking grand strategy horror game. It's apparently pretty great. On Steam it sits at a very positive 89%. There's no aggregate critic score on OpenCritic, but more than a few outlets have scored it a 9 out of 10, including God is a Geek, who said, quote, "The fabulous Fear Machine features a unique pulp art style and some straightforward ideas that make it a wonderfully addictive strategy title," end quote. Sticking with the indie titles, Wargroove 2 hit PC and Switch last week, and it too has done pretty damn well for itself. Steam reviews have it at a respectable, mostly positive 76%, but critics have it at a mighty 85, which is pretty huge actually. Metro Game Central scored this one an 8 out of 10, saying, quote, "The debt to Advance Wars still overshadows it, but despite a relative lack of new features, this is a solid sequel to one of the best indie strategy games of the last few years," end quote. They don't make many Advance Wars style games these days, so if you've got a hankering for that formula, then this looks like it'll scratch that itch. Detective Pikachu Returns dropped last week for the Switch, and it's not looking great. A fair 68 on OpenCritic, which is really, really low, even for Pokemon titles, which, let's be real, have been pretty middling this past generation. Most of the reviews point to a game which is absurdly simple, which is great for kids, but its presentation and plot does seem to be angling for a slightly older audience. CG Magazine kind of sums it up when they scored it a 7 out of 10 and wrote, quote, "Detective Pikachu Returns may not be the most puzzling of adventures, but it's fun and charming enough to stay engaging," end quote. TLDR, it's pretty skippable unless you were a diehard Pokemon fan, which probably means it'll be like the top selling game of October or something. I don't know. Interesting one to circle back to is Forza Motorsport. So we covered the critic scores last week, which were really glowing, a mighty 84 on OpenCritic, 8s, 9s, and firm handshakes all around. Fast forward to this week, the game has dropped on Steam, and at the time of writing, it's sitting at a mixed 55%, which is very, very bad for Microsoft's flagship racing series. Those reviews do point to some patchy PC performance, sure, but more than anything else, racing fans seem to be disappointed with how short the single-player mode is, how limited the tool options are, and in particular how grindy the game now is, since the progression model is now more focused on building your cars rather than just getting them. The move to a more graduated progression model was something that I was really excited about, since I love that stuff, but from the sounds of things, Turn 10 haven't quite dialed it in properly, and as a result, people are not happy. Forza Motorsport is a platform of sorts, and Turn 10 are committed to updating and improving the game over the long term, so I'm sure they'll get all this stuff worked out eventually, but for now, you may want to hold off until some of those teething issues are worked out. And finally, Assassin's Creed Mirage. We covered my take last week, review below the like button, but since then, other critic reviews have dropped and punters have their hands on the game as well. Overall, it seems to be a pretty positive reception. I personally didn't love it and didn't recommend it as a result, but Mirage is sitting at a strong 77 on OpenCritic, and speaking to people who've played it and reading the discourse online, most of them kind of enjoy it. Most of those people will freely admit that the game isn't spectacular, but for them, it's doing just enough to bring back that feeling of playing an older Assassin's Creed game, and for that reason, they're happy. It's a really interesting title to dig into, and that's exactly what we did on this week's episode of the Friends Per Second podcast. We did like a 45-minute deep dive into Mirage and the Assassin's Creed franchise, etc. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link below the like button. So what's coming out this week? Pretty stacked week, actually. Kicking things off is Total War Pharaoh. Haven't seen a lot of hype for this one, actually, no doubt owing to the fact that Creative Assembly and the Total War community are not exactly the best of pals right now for a variety of reasons. Sega just cancelled Creative Assembly's next big release, Hyenas, when it was like 6 yards from the finish line. Plus, they just announced that job cuts were looming. That combination of events is more than enough to take the wind out of the sails of any upcoming release. But hype or no hype, Total War Pharaoh drops exclusive for PC today. Honkai Star Rail is the next big thing out of MiHoYo, makers of Genshin Impact. If you like Genshin, then you're probably going to like this. It's been out on PC for a while now, and I've heard nothing but good things about it, actually. It's hitting PS5 today, no word about an Xbox port at this point. Transformers Earthspark Expedition is a fairly simple-looking action brawler starring Bumblebee. Probably something targeting kids, is hitting all platforms on the 13th. Biggest release of the week is Lords of the Fallen, the reboot of a franchise that probably didn't deserve a second lease on life, but they're bringing it back anyway. I played a preview build of this a little while ago, preview link in the description. I actually had a great time with it, I really did. I'm not sure about the combat side of the equation yet, but the setting, visuals, and unique dual world mechanic really hooked me. Austin is actually playing through this one right now as I'm currently busy with Spider-Man and other stuff that I'm not allowed to talk about, but he will have a review up, though it will be late because he's doing some travel for some secret stuff that he's not allowed to talk about yet. Either way, Lords of the Fallen is definitely on the menu for us, and if you're keen, you can grab it on the 13th for PC and current-gen consoles. We're getting a new Mario game next week, but before that, we're getting some new Sonic. Sonic Superstars launches on all platforms on the 17th. It's a brand new 2D Sonic game that looks to bring the 2D formula into the modern era, the way that Sonic Frontiers finally seemed to arrive at a 3D formula that broadly worked. Sonic Superstars features 3D-style graphics, multiple playable characters, the ability to play co-op, 8-player PvP modes, and plenty more. It actually looks like a pretty ambitious package for a franchise that's been content just to re-release the original games about 18 times. Let's hope this one delivers. Wizard with a Gun is a very smart-looking isometric survival game set in a magical wilderness. I'm getting Don't Starve vibes from this one, but with, more wizards and more guns. This one is being published by Devolver Digital, so it's probably going to be worth at least checking out. It arrives on all platforms bar the Switch on the 17th. And finally, Diablo 4 Season 2 begins on the 17th. It's Season of the Blood, and it adds new things. To be honest, they're making some big changes to the game, responding to the many complaints people have about the current state of Diablo 4. Too many changes to recount here, but they do look promising, and if you've been eyeing a return to Diablo, you may want to check out what that patch delivers and see if it might be for you. Personally, and I know it's an unpopular opinion, I really like Diablo 4, and if I had more free time, I would be playing it right now. I am too busy, so I guess I'll get the benefit of all of these improvements when I eventually return to the game, which I imagine will be for the first expansion likely due out next year. Hey, put all of this on your radar. Steam Next Fest is back. If you're not familiar, Next Fest happens a couple of times a year. It's an online festival hosted by Valve in Steam, and it's a showcase of upcoming indie games. On the main page, you'll find a schedule which has upcoming live stream events. This is where developers personally showcase the games they're working on, and it's always awesome to see the passion that each of them have for what they're making. The main star of the show, though, are the demos. Scroll down and you'll find hundreds of them, all of them totally free, and Valve even has some handy tabs that help surface the most popular titles. Stuff like Enshrouded, a great-looking survival game similar to Valheim. There's Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, which is a top-down roguelike set in the Deep Rock universe. Love that. The Last Faith, which I mentioned earlier, is on there, as is the RoboCop game, which, believe you me, we are going to talk about real soon. There's a lot here, too much to cover in this block alone, but I really encourage you to get in there, download a few things that catch your eye, and if you like them, be sure to wishlist them, as that always helps out developers in a big way. Get in there quick though, because Next Fest only runs for a week and then it's gone. Until next year, of course. Sort of free stuff time now, and a few interesting shouts this week. Right now on Epic, you can still grab Godlike Burger, a restaurant management game that involves killing your customers and serving them to other customers. Hope everyone has a strong stomach, you included. Later this week, that'll disappear, replaced by 2 new titles. The first is Blazing Sails, which is basically Sea of Thieves, as well as Cube Ultimate Bundle, containing Cube 1 and 2, as well as some DLC. It's a first-person puzzle game, so think Portal or the Talos Principle, and it's meant to be pretty good. Prime Gaming's got something good going this week. Ghostwire Tokyo. This one has its fair share of problems, to be honest, but the setting, the yokai enemies, and the vibe is top tier. TangoWorks are actually working on a sequel to this one, if that Xbox leak was accurate, so this is probably a great way to get caught up on the franchise before the sequel drops. And finally, the PS Plus extra tier for October. The exact contents haven't been confirmed, but it has leaked thanks to Deal Labs magazine. If they're right, which they usually are, Sony ponies can expect a solid lineup this month, including the likes of Alien Isolation, Elite Dangerous, Disco Elysium Final Cut, Dark Pictures Anthology House of Ashes, and Gotham Knights. So yeah, not a bad lineup actually. The feel-good story for the week isn't the chuckles variety, instead it's just straight up good news that makes me feel good. Does anyone remember Gigantic? If you're one of the 4 people that answered yes, then respect. You have either good taste or good memory or both. For everyone else, Gigantic was an Xbox and PC exclusive third-person MOBA that saw 2 teams battle in the midfield before releasing a massive or gigantic boss-type minion that needed to be brought down to win the game. It was awesome and I loved it, but it also arrived at precisely the wrong moment, at a time when everyone had given up trying to make MOBAs to compete with League or Dota, and Overwatch had cleaned everyone's clock when it comes to the whole hero shooter thing. So Gigantic died a swift and unceremonious death, taken offline about a year after it went live. Fast forward to last week, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, people who had previously played Gigantic got an email telling them that the game was back and playable for a limited time, one-time only event, which happened this past week. That event was hosted by none other than Gearbox, who now own the rights to Gigantic, courtesy of Embracer acquiring them a while ago. Gearbox have been clear that this is a one-time only thing, but why would you do this if it was just a one-time only thing? Like, you had to spend proper time and money to make this happen, and you don't do that for no reason. So it looks like Gearbox are fixing to bring Gigantic back, or at least, flirting with the idea, and I couldn't be happier because this game absolutely deserves a second shot, and I genuinely hope it gets it. Next up, Lawbreakers. Am I right, boys? I'm not joking about that, by the way. Lawbreakers needs to come back. Cliffy B, stop flirting with the idea and make it happen, please. All right, that's the show, ladies and gents. Another longer than usual offering, but we did have a bunch of news squeak in just as I was finalizing the script, making for a more packed show than usual. Did you enjoy yourself? If you did, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button on the video. That's what helps the algorithm pick up and spread videos like this, allowing me to disseminate my stone cold takes and terrible jokes to the masses. If you are new here, welcome. We do this every week, whether you like it or not. But if you do like it, then consider hitting the subscribe button and hitting the notification bell. Always a lot going on around here, and we'd love for you to stick around. All right, that's it. I'm done. Thank you for watching, and a big thanks to this week's sponsor, Manscaped. It may be spooky season, but you don't want to scare people with that scraggly beard. Give them something to look at with Manscaped's Handyman. If you're tired of bad razors making your neck look like a scary movie, the Handyman skin-safe technology will help reduce nicks and cuts, and you can finally feel confident when going for that close shave. This thing is tailor-made for me personally, since it allows me to quickly and easily tidy up any stubble when I'm about to head out the door, which does happen. I do go outside from time to time. I also do a fair amount of travel, and this thing is great. Pop it into my toiletries bag and I can leave the razor, shaving cream, and other treatments at home. As for my wolf men with a little more scruff, Manscaped's Beard Hedger Pro Kit has everything you need to tame your mane. The beard hedger is exactly what you'd expect. It's an electric trimmer that allows you to finesse your beard, allowing you to achieve whatever style you're going for. Short or long, scruffy or tidy, it doesn't matter. You can quickly and easily adjust the settings on the beard hedger, allowing you to maintain or style your manly mane like never before. Best of all, both the beard hedger and the handyman are rechargeable, waterproof, and super easy to clean and maintain. Convenience and reliability are key for everything Manscaped make, and these brand new products are no different. So if you want to sculpt your beard with the beard hedger or level up your away game with the handyman, head straight over to manscaped.com and use offer code SKILLUP for 20% off and free shipping. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com using offer code SKILLUP. There's no trick with this treat. Manscaped have got you covered. Thanks to them for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.